Good morning, Leda.
Good morning, Diana.
Nice to see and to hear you. Now and today, for our future and possible participants, would be interesting to know that what is one of the main parties of this training, and what is narrative coaching that you will use as approach to your training exercises, explanations. Could you tell a little bit about that?
Yes, first of all, that you can call it like narrative coaching, or you can call it like story coaching. There might be different names to it because I use principles also from storytelling, from story coaching, from storying, which now is a very upstream also in the organizations. But also I use principles from the narrative therapy and narrative coaching. But you're asking now about narrative coaching, which has the roots mainly in how do we create our perception, how do we create the stories we live by. And often we are even unconscious that there is a story. There are several stories in our head which are running like a software and which impact everything we do, everything. The words we choose, the language we use, the behaviors we actually exhibit, our reactions. So as you said today in the morning, all is in our heads. Yes, it is. And sometimes it sounds really simply, but if it were so simply to change what is in our head, then it would be really easy for people to do that. However, it is not so simply. And until we do not become aware of the stories and the most the strongest parts of the stories in our heads, it's not so easy to change. So many people would like to do that consciously, but it's not easy. We as coaches work with changing beliefs, but again, it's not so easy to change the beliefs because the beliefs are just one part of the stories we have. And in the story coaching or narrative coaching, we look to those elements which actually hold together the whole story and which you need to address or to change or to rearrange in your head to have a different story and to have a different life.
And I'm wondering, will you give them any technologies to use this approach for their clients in their coaching work?
Yes, we will work with several approaches, let's call methods or technologies. I'm still creating some of them, so I don't have everything yet ready, but I can share at least three. So one will be of how can we really use stories and elements of stories when we coach our clients, or how can we look to our own lives through some of the stories we read, we experienced, or we retained, because there is no coincidence. There is a coincidence between what we retain and what we forget. And the information or the stories we retain and recreate in our minds, that has the impact on us. Not actually what we heard, but what we memorize from that. So we will look back also to our stories we heard in our lives and which made an impact most probably on us. And we will see how are those stories now in alignment with what we believe, with our perception of the life, with our identities, because those stories actually have a big impact on how did we create our own identities. The another approach is what I really loved at the university when we studied is the science of hermeneutics in philology, and especially that's Gadamer's approach, which is a very interactional approach, and it is about a systemic approach to interpretation. So what we do all the time, we create interpretations in our head. And I really disliked in the schools and in the universities when we had to analyze, those stories and literature tasks. But when I was introduced to this approach, which is called the hermeneutics, and which was created by Gadamer, I just got so much inspired, because this is not about what has happened, what was written in a story, but it's about my interaction with that story, my interaction with any event, and the impact of that interaction on me. So we will use this kind of approach, because often it's not important what is happening around us, but it's important of how do we deal with that, and what is, again, the story and the interpretation we create. And the third approach, I again like really very much, and it can be used in many ways. I'm sure you have heard about Joseph Campbell, who studied the psychology and philosophy of stories. He studied all possible religions, all possible folklore in the world. He actually spent like 50 years on that. And he was looking for what is really common for the human beings. Do we have something which is the same despite of the cultures? And he found a single way, a single idea, or a single phenomenon which is common to all of the cultures in the world, no matter what language you speak, no matter who brought you up, no matter what is your religion. And that is this theory of the human transformation. So how do we really change? How does transformation happen in us? And he created, of course, a very complex model, and he has very complex books on that. It's very interesting, but it's not an easy read for anyone. But based on that, we can use a simpler model in coaching to actually understand where our clients are in their transformational journeys, what is exactly the intervention or the support needed from the coach, and how can we best do that with our clients, and of course also with ourselves. And when I understood that, and when I started to use that model, the whole journey with my clients became kind of more natural, in a way easier, in a way I became more patient, most probably, more understanding with the whole process. Because you know that not every session ends with enthusiasm, and they should not end with enthusiasm, because sometimes an insight of the client, or even a stronger emotion, might be much more useful than just the enthusiasm. And when you know that that's part of the journey, and when you know where does that happen in the journey, then you just know that you're in the right place, and you don't have to do anything. You know, just you need to support your client, you need to wait, you know what will happen and how you need to actually behave when that happens. But it doesn't, it releases the guilt we have sometimes, because we think we are not good coaches if we don't have all the time those positive emotions with the client.
Yes.
Yeah. And this is actually the opposite of how do you work at very deep level. You give everything to your client they need, but you also allow the natural incubation period to just do the work.
I think it's very interesting and complex systemic approach for coaching work as a model, and also, as I can hear, and also understanding what is going on with the client, and maybe for our coaches, especially who are becoming more and more professional after their basic education and coaching. And it seems for me it's also about scientific approach and about values, human values.
You mentioned the scientific word, and I really like it. I think that it's very important to be able to partly at least explain something by science, especially for coaches who have a very well developed left brain. So the neuroscience now has a lot of information about what is happening in the brain and how we actually create or retain those stories, and what we need to know in order to be able to change those stories. Because we don't have access to some of those stories which are driving our behavior. And we don't have access to those because they are stored in a different part of the brain. And in order to be able to deal with that, so it's like putting something from your server on your computer, because while it's on the server, you might not have always direct access to it, especially if your computer is not connected to the internet. So is also with some of the stories, that if you know the technology of the brain, what is happening, yeah, absolutely, then it's easier to bring some of the stories in that part of the brain where you actually have more control on them, and you can deal with them.
Yes, and I'm looking forward to be a participant of your training too.
You know that every organization has a story. Every team has a story which is often unconscious, and they take up different roles. And we might blame one person while that person is just playing a necessary role in the story. And the question is not how we deal with that person, but how we recreate the story of the whole team or of the whole organization. So we'll talk about that as well.
I think that we are looking forward to see you here in Moscow in September, and we will be happy to work with you.
It will be my first time, and I will create a narrative about what is it to be in Moscow.
Nice. So we will start a new story together.